The sand is already stained before the gates open. Beneath the roar of the Roman crowd, men wait in darkness, wearing bronze, leather, and fear. Some are slaves. Some are prisoners. Some have chosen the arena because the world outside has left them nothing else. But gladiators were not just warriors fighting for glory. They were products of a brutal system built on money, politics, punishment, and public spectacle. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, now step into the arena where survival was never guaranteed, mercy was never simple, and Rome turned human suffering into civilization's grandest show. The sand is already dark before the gates open. In the first light of a Roman morning, while the city beyond the amphitheatre still smells of bread ovens, wet stone, smoke, and animal dung. Men move beneath the arena floor with the quiet discipline of people who know they are being watched before they are seen. Above them, tens of thousands gather in rising rings of stone. Senators sit close enough to observe the twitch of a hand. Merchants lean forward with cups of watered wine. Freedmen, soldiers, visitors, servants, and the poor crowd into higher seats where the heat will soon gather beneath the awnings. Somewhere below, a fighter adjusts the strap of a greave against his shin. Another lifts a helmet so heavy it turns the world into a narrow tunnel of bronze and breath. The crowd does not yet see his face, and that is part of the design. In the arena, men are not merely men. They are symbols before they are bodies, costumes before they are names, and when the horn sounds, they will step into a world where death is possible, mercy is theatrical, and survival itself becomes part of the show. The dark truth about ancient gladiators is not simply that they killed and died for entertainment. That much is familiar, almost too familiar, polished by paintings, films, and tourist souvenirs until the brutality seems distant, almost decorative. The stranger truth is that the arena was one of the most carefully organized institutions in Roman life. It was not a chaotic pit where rage spilled freely across the sand. It was a disciplined machine built from law, money, training, spectacle, punishment, religion, social hierarchy, and political calculation. It could turn enslaved captives into professional performers, condemned criminals into examples, emperors into generous fathers of the people, and a crowd into a living court of judgment. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because the arena is not just a story about violence. It is a window into what Rome believed civilization was allowed to do when everyone was watching. At first glance, the amphitheatre appears to be a place of openness. There is sun, stone, public noise, and the massive visibility of the crowd. Yet the deeper one looks, the more hidden systems appear beneath the surface. The sand exists partly to absorb blood, but also to erase it. After one contest ends, workers can rake the ground, cover the stains, drag away the injured or dead, and prepare the same space for a new act of meaning. A body can vanish quickly in such a place. A reputation can last much longer. Gladiators stand at the centre of this contradiction. Roman society marks them with infamy, placing them among people whose bodies are publicly available for shame, danger, and spectacle. Yet those same fighters can be admired, desired, painted on walls, scratched into pottery, praised for courage, and remembered by names that outlive emperors in the minds of ordinary viewers. They are degraded and celebrated at once. And no single explanation fully accounts for this tension. What survives in the record suggests that the arena worked because it made violence understandable. Rome is a world built on conquest, slavery, discipline, and hierarchy, but it also prides itself on order, law, and ritual. Raw killing alone is not enough. It must be framed. It must be given costume, timing, rank, and rules. The gladiator does not simply fight. He appears as a type. The Murmillo with a broad shield and fish-crested helmet, the Thraex with curved sword and small shield, the Retiarius with net and trident, the Secutor with a smooth helmet designed to pursue him. These pairings are not random. They create recognizable drama, almost like moving emblems of Rome's conquered enemies, military memory, and staged imbalance. The audience knows what to expect, and yet the outcome remains uncertain enough to hold the breath in the throat. That uncertainty matters. A gladiator match is not only a killing. In fact, scholars still debate the death rate of gladiatorial combat, and the evidence remains incomplete. Many trained gladiators likely survived repeated appearances, because skilled fighters are expensive, and because a dead man cannot be marketed again. A good gladiator represents investment food, housing, training, medical treatment, equipment, and reputation. The crowd comes not merely to see bodies fall, but to see skill tested under the possibility of death. That possibility is the hidden wire beneath everything. Remove it, and the spectacle loses its terrible charge. Make death too common, and the business wastes its own stars. The arena lives between those extremes, balancing cruelty with calculation. The men waiting below the gates know this balance with a clarity no spectator can fully share. Some are enslaved, some are prisoners of war, some are condemned, some, more surprisingly, are volunteers, men who sign away legal protections for pay, fame, debt relief, or the dangerous promise of reinvention. The oath associated with gladiators is chilling in its simplicity. They submit to burning, binding, beating, and death by the sword. Whether the exact formula varied or was later stylized, it captures something real about the condition they enter. The gladiator gives another person authority over his body, and in return receives training, food, structure, and a chance never guaranteed to become more valuable alive than dead. In a society where many lives are already controlled by others, this can be a bargain made under pressure, desperation, ambition, or all three at once. Above, the crowd continues to swell. The amphitheatre is a city inside the city, arranged with Roman precision, rank determines sightline, clothing marks status, access to shade, closeness to the sand, and the ability to see blood clearly are all part of social geography. The arena teaches Rome about itself by seating Rome in order and then placing exposed bodies at the centre. The elite may pretend refinement, but they are there. The poor may shout from the heights, but their voices matter when mercy is being performed. The emperor, when present, becomes the still point of the storm, the man who gives games, receives gratitude, and can appear merciful or severe before thousands. The spectacle is public pleasure, but also public instruction. It says that power can organize violence so completely that even death arrives on schedule. There is another smell beneath the heat and dust, one less often imagined than blood-cooked grain. Gladiators in training are sometimes associated with a heavy barley-based diet, and ancient sources even mock them with a phrase suggesting barley eaters. Modern analysis of some gladiator remains has added a strange texture to that image, suggesting diets rich in carbohydrates, perhaps designed to build a layer of fat that could protect against cuts while making wounds bleed dramatically, without immediately reaching vital organs. The evidence does not describe every school or every fighter, and scholars still debate the details, but the possibility is unsettling. The gladiator body may have been shaped not only for strength, but for spectacle, endurance, and visible injury. Even flesh becomes part of the staging. So the gate opens onto more than combat. It opens onto an entire Roman idea of control. Here, fear is made visible, courage is made useful, defeat is made legible. The crowd can look down and believe that barbarism has been tamed into ceremony. that danger has been fenced within walls, that the Empire's violence can be turned into rhythm, colour, skill, and applause. Yet beneath that polished surface stands a human being listening to the first roar of the day, feeling the weight of armour, the dryness of his mouth, the roughness of sand underfoot. He may be famous, he may be anonymous, he may be trained to survive, he may already understand that the system around him is larger than any single blade. And as the sun climbs over the amphitheatre, the terrible brilliance of the games begins to reveal itself. Rome does not hide its violence in darkness. It brings violence into the light, gives it rules, sells seats around it, and calls the whole thing civilization. Long before the Colosseum rises above Rome like a stone mountain, before emperors learn to feed crowds with spectacle, before gladiators become painted figures on tavern walls and household lamps, the first shape of the games is smaller, darker, and more intimate. It begins near the dead. The earliest gladiatorial combats known from Roman tradition are connected not to public holidays in the modern sense, but to funerals, to the attempt of powerful families to honour the memory of a man whose name still carries weight after his body has been carried away. The arena, in its first Roman form, is not yet the Empire's great theatre of domination. It is a graveside offering, a ritual of blood placed beside mourning, status, and ancestral memory. What survives in the record suggests that Romans themselves later understood these early combats as funerary, though scholars still debate how much of the custom came from Rome directly, and how much passed through neighbouring peoples of Italy, especially the Etruscans and Campanians, whose own traditions left deep marks on Roman culture. This origin matters because it changes the meaning of the blood. At a funeral, violence is not merely entertainment, it stands close to sacrifice, debt, inheritance, and the unsettling presence of the dead among the living. A noble Roman family does not simply bury its honoured ancestor and retreat quietly into private grief. It displays lineage. It reminds the city of offices held, wars fought, enemies defeated, alliances formed, favours owed. Death becomes a political stage. Wax masks of ancestors may appear in funeral processions, carried or worn as if the dead themselves are returned to witness the final honours. Speeches praise the old virtues, crowds gather, memory becomes public property. Into this atmosphere, the clash of armed men carries a severe kind of symbolism. Life is offered beside death. Courage is performed beside loss, and the family sponsoring the event proves that its grief has the wealth and authority to command bodies. The earliest recorded Roman gladiatorial games are often linked to 264 BCE, when 3 pairs of fighters are said to have fought in the Forum Boarium in honour of the dead Junius Brutus Pera. The number is modest compared with later spectacles, almost shockingly small when measured against imperial games involving hundreds or even thousands of participants over many days. Yet that small beginning contains the seed of something immense. 3 pairs are enough to create a pattern. 3 pairs are enough to show that aristocratic commemoration can be sharpened by danger. 3 pairs are enough to teach the crowd that elite mourning can become public spectacle. No single explanation fully accounts for why this practice took root so powerfully, but it appears at exactly the kind of historical moment when Rome is expanding, absorbing foreign customs, and learning to think of violence as both a necessity and a language. The Rome of the 3rd century BCE is not yet the marble capital of imperial imagination. It is a hard, ambitious republic locked in struggle across Italy and then across the Mediterranean. Its citizens know war not as a distant policy, but as a recurring fact of life. Armies march, fields are emptied of men, captives are taken, triumphs parade through the streets with prisoners, spoils, animals, and conquered images displayed before cheering crowds. The city learns to see domination as order and conquest as destiny. In that setting, gladiatorial combat fits into a broader habit of turning victory into public theatre. A captive enemy can be enslaved, sold, executed, paraded, or trained. The defeated body becomes proof of Roman success. The arena, even in its early form, gives that proof a dangerous beauty. Yet the early games are not simply the state displaying power, they are also private ambition wearing the mask of tradition. Roman aristocrats compete fiercely for honour, office, and public memory. A funeral is a chance to remind voters, clients, rivals, and allies that a family has served Rome and deserves continued influence. As the games grow, generosity becomes political currency. A man who gives the people a memorable spectacle earns gratitude. A family that stages unusually lavish funeral games signals wealth and seriousness. Over time, the line between honouring the dead and courting the living becomes thin enough to nearly disappear. The bloodshed for an ancestor also stains the path toward office. This is one of the darker transformations in the history of the games. A ritual attached to death becomes a tool of public competition. The more citizens expect spectacle, the more ambitious families feel pressure to provide it. If one funeral offers a few pears, another can offer more. If one sponsor displays ordinary fighters, another can seek better trained men, rarer equipment, more dramatic pairings, more elaborate timing. The crowd's appetite does not need to be invented by emperors. It is educated slowly by the Republic itself. The people learn to gather, compare, judge, and remember. The elite learn that violence can buy attention. From these exchanges, the later machinery of the arena begins to form. Slavery gives that machinery its bodies. Rome's wars produce captives on a scale that can be difficult to imagine. Human beings from different regions, languages, and traditions are dragged into Roman systems of labour, sale, punishment, and display. Some captives end up in mines, fields, households, workshops, or military support roles. Others are marked for the dangerous world of combat. The evidence remains incomplete, especially for the earliest periods. But the connection between conquest and gladiatorial supply is hard to miss. The arena grows in a society where human ownership is normal, where legal status determines the value of a life, and where the suffering of the enslaved can be made publicly meaningful without troubling the moral order of many spectators. A free citizen's body is supposed to be protected by law and dignity. An enslaved captive's body can be used to make a point. Still, even in this early world, gladiatorial combat cannot be reduced to random cruelty. Romans are deeply interested in discipline, courage, endurance, and the ability to face death without collapse. These values are praised in soldiers and statesmen, but in the arena they are extracted from people denied full honour. That contradiction sits at the heart of the spectacle from the beginning. A gladiator may be socially degraded, yet he is expected to display a form of courage that Romans admire. He may be forced into danger, yet his composure can win applause. He may be an enemy, slave, or outsider. Yet for a few moments the crowd measures him by qualities Rome claims as its own. The games therefore allow Romans to admire virtue while keeping it safely beneath them. By the late Republic, this older funerary practice is expanding beyond its original frame. Games are no longer confined to small commemorations. They become more frequent, more elaborate, and more useful to public men seeking popularity. Temporary wooden stands rise before permanent amphitheatres dominate the urban landscape. Sponsors learn how to arrange not only fights, but anticipation. The crowd comes to know names, styles, reputations, and risks. Political life grows harsher, inequality sharper, and competition among elites more extravagant. The arena absorbs all of it. It takes mourning from the tomb, captives from conquest, ambition from the forum, and hunger from the crowd, then binds them into a spectacle that feels both ancient and new, The dark truth is that Rome does not stumble accidentally into gladiatorial violence. It learns it, rehearses it, rewards it, and gives it respectable ancestry. The games begin near the dead, but they do not stay there. They move outward into public life because they serve too many purposes at once. They honour ancestors, display wealth, discipline fear, advertise conquest, entertain voters, and transform human vulnerability into a civic event. By the time Rome becomes powerful enough to rule far beyond Italy, the logic is already in place. The city has discovered that blood can speak to the living more loudly than stone inscriptions, and once that lesson is learned, it proves difficult to forget. As the games move away from the funeral ground and deeper into the public life of Rome, the men who enter the sand begin to arrive from many different doors, and each door carries its own form of darkness. Some are prisoners taken in war, stripped of homeland, language, rank, and name, until the arena gives them a new identity shaped by Roman eyes. Some are enslaved people sold into training schools because their bodies seem strong enough to be made profitable. Some are criminals condemned not simply to die, but to die in a way that teaches the crowd what Roman power can do to those it marks as disposable. Others, more unsettlingly, come by contract, choosing the gladiator's oath because debt, hunger, ambition, disgrace, or the hope of sudden fame makes the danger seem like a bargain. The arena does not gather one kind of victim. It gathers people from the broken edges of empire and then forces them into a single system, where the difference between coercion and choice is often painfully thin. A captive from a conquered people may be the easiest figure for the Roman audience to understand. He represents victory made flesh. Long before he becomes a trained fighter, his body has already passed through the violence of conquest. He has seen a town stormed, an army defeated, a family separated, or a market where human beings are inspected like livestock. Rome's expansion produces these lives in vast numbers, and the games feed on the empire's ability to turn foreign defeat into domestic entertainment. Yet what survives in the record suggests that captives did not all enter the arena in the same way. Some may have been sent directly to death in public punishment. Others were sold into schools and trained carefully, because a strong captive with discipline could become more valuable as a performer than as a corpse. The evidence remains incomplete, but the pattern is clear enough. Rome's wars did not end when the battle ended, for some of the defeated war continued in front of a crowd. Enslaved people born or sold within Roman society could also be pushed toward the arena. A master might sell a slave to a lanista, the owner and manager of gladiators, especially if the slave was considered rebellious, dangerous, physically impressive, or simply profitable. Roman law and social custom make the enslaved body available in ways that are difficult to soften. A person can be moved from kitchen to quarry, from field to workshop, from household service to sexual exploitation, from mine to training yard, depending on what others decide that body's worth. Gladiatorial training, brutal as it is, may sometimes offer better food, medical attention, and a strange form of upward visibility compared with the worst labour systems of the ancient world. That does not make it freedom. It only reveals the bleak range of choices imposed on enslaved lives. In a world where mines could swallow workers in darkness and disease, the arena's danger might be more visible, more dramatic. And yet not always the most miserable fate Rome could assign. Condemned criminals occupy another place in this system, and their role exposes the difference between gladiatorial combat and public execution. Not everyone who dies in the arena is a gladiator in the professional sense. Some are sentenced to the beasts, burned, exposed, or forced into hopeless combat with little chance of survival. These punishments are designed to strip away dignity. They tell the crowd that certain crimes place a person outside the protections of ordinary death. The Romans can be precise about categories, and that precision matters. A trained gladiator, Even one enslaved or legally degraded has skill, equipment, a fighting identity, and the possibility of recognition. A condemned person thrown into staged slaughter has almost none of these. Popular imagination often blends them together, but the distinction is important. The arena contains both spectacle and punishment, both professionalized danger and deliberate destruction. No single explanation fully accounts for how spectators experience that mixture, but Roman society seems to have accepted it as part of the same moral theatre. Then there are the volunteers, the octorati, whose existence complicates every simple story told about gladiators. Some free men willingly signed contracts to fight. The word willingly must be handled with care. A man crushed by debt, shamed by failure, hungry for money, cut off from family support, or drawn by the possibility of fame may choose danger from a position that is not truly free in the way modern listeners might imagine. Still, these volunteers matter because they show the arena's seductive power. It does not only consume those who have no choice, it attracts some who believe the risk may transform them. A failed man might become a known fighter, a poor man might earn money, a disgraced man might find a new identity and courage. A reckless man might chase admiration among people who would otherwise never learn his name. Rome despises the gladiator's status, but it also rewards the gladiator's visibility. And some men step toward that contradiction with open eyes. The oath associated with these contracted fighters is one of the most chilling traces of the gladiatorial world. To accept burning, binding, beating, and death by the sword is to surrender the body in advance. It is a legal and symbolic descent. A free man who becomes an octoratus does not become enslaved in every ordinary sense, but he accepts a condition marked by infamia, a stain on public honour. The act is almost a ritual death before the first fight. The man still breathes, trains, eats, and speaks. But socially he has crossed into a lower world where his body may be exposed for public judgment. Scholars still debate the exact application of these contracts across time and place. Yet the surviving references suggest that the Romans understood such a choice as both shocking and comprehensible. It was shameful, but not unimaginable. That is often where the darkest truths of a society live. Once inside the system, these different origins begin to blur under training. A captive, an enslaved man, a condemned fighter spared for skill, and a volunteer may all be placed under the authority of the same school. The arena gives them stage identities that can erase much of the life before. A Gaul might be turned into a Mumio. A Thracian name might become a fighting style long after real Thracians have been absorbed into Roman categories. A man's past is rearranged into costume. Rome is very good at this kind of transformation. It takes the diversity of conquered peoples and translates them into types the crowd can read quickly from a distance. Helmet, shield, weapon, posture, and pairing become a new language. The person inside the armour remains real, afraid, hungry, ambitious, injured, or resigned. But the audience sees first what the system has taught it to see. This transformation is not always total. Names survive in graffiti, inscriptions, and epitaphs, sometimes with records of victories, origins, or affectionate dedications. A gladiator may be remembered as a Thracian, a Syrian, a slave, a freedman, a lover, a husband, a member of a troop, or a fighter with a particular number of wins. These fragments are small, but they matter. They pull individual lives out of the mass and show that the arena's people were not merely symbols. They had careers, rivalries, injuries, admirers, and sometimes households. Some died young, some lived long enough to retire, some may have gained freedom. Others vanished without inscription, leaving no trace beyond the system that used them. What survives in the record suggests both organisation and loss enough names to prove individuality, not enough voices to recover full lives. The dark truth of this recruitment world is not that every gladiator is the same kind of doomed prisoner, nor that the arena is secretly a path to glory. Both ideas are too simple. The reality is more uncomfortable. The gladiatorial system is flexible enough to turn war captives, enslaved workers, criminals, debtors, adventurers, and desperate volunteers into marketable danger. It feeds on inequality, but it also offers selective rewards. It degrades men, then asks them to display courage. It strips them of ordinary honour, then gives them a form of fame ordinary labourers could rarely dream of. It is coercive, but not always crude. It is theatrical, but not fake. By the time a fighter steps through the gate, the crowd sees a gladiator. Behind that single word stands a chain of conquest, sale, punishment, contract, training, and reinvention, all leading to the same bright centre of sand. Inside the gladiator school, the arena begins long before the crowd appears. It begins in enclosed yards, barred sleeping quarters, kitchens heavy with steam, weapon rooms smelling of leather and oil, and training grounds where the same movements are repeated until they become less like choices and more like reflexes. The ludus is not simply a gymnasium and not simply a prison. It is both, and more than both. It is a place where men taken from different worlds are remade into controlled danger. The walls keep them in, but the routine is what truly captures them. Every day teaches the body when to wake, when to eat, when to drill, when to endure pain, when to obey. A new recruit may arrive with strength, anger, military experience, or nothing at all. But none of those qualities is enough. The school must turn him into something legible to Rome, a fighter who can survive, perform, and submit to the rules of the spectacle. The first lesson is discipline. A gladiator cannot merely swing a weapon with fury, because fury wastes energy and dies quickly under armour. He must learn posture, distance, timing, balance, and restraint. A heavy shield changes the shape of the body. A helmet narrows vision and traps heat. A sword feels different after an hour of drill than it does when first lifted in the hand. The training yard teaches these truths without mercy. Wooden weapons, often heavier than real ones, are used to build endurance. Posts stand in for enemies, receiving thousands of cuts and thrusts from men whose own lives may later depend on the exact angle of a strike. Trainers watch not only for power, but for obedience. A reckless fighter can ruin an investment. A coward can shame a school. A man who cannot be controlled is dangerous in the wrong way. The trainers themselves are often former fighters or specialists who understand the craft from inside the body. They know how fear changes breathing, how a wounded leg alters balance, how a shield arm weakens before a sword arm, how a man who looks strong may panic when his helmet closes around his head. Their work is practical and psychological at once. They must make fighters brave enough to stand under public danger, but not so uncontrolled that they ignore the structure of the match. What survives in the record suggests that gladiatorial combat had recognizable techniques and professional standards, though the evidence remains incomplete. Much must be inferred from images, weapons, injuries, inscriptions, and scattered literary references. Still, the basic reality is hard to doubt these men trained not as a mob of doomed prisoners, but as dangerous specialists. Food is part of the same system. Ancient writers associate gladiators with barley, beans, and a heavy diet that could seem humble or even contemptible to elite observers. Modern analysis of some remains has given this old detail new weight, suggesting that at least certain gladiators consumed a carbohydrate-rich diet, perhaps with plant-based staples and mineral supplements. Scholars still debate how widely this pattern applied, and no single burial ground can speak for every school across the Roman world. But the idea is revealing. Gladiators were not simply fed for brute muscle. Their bodies may have been shaped for endurance, recovery, and the strange practical needs of combat in front of an audience. A layer of body fat could cushion shallow cuts, making wounds dramatic without always being immediately fatal. In the arena, even diet becomes part of the hidden architecture of survival. Medical care also complicates the familiar image of disposable men thrown casually toward death. A trained gladiator costs money. His body is a commercial asset, and a damaged asset must be repaired if possible. Schools could employ or consult physicians, and some Roman medical knowledge developed in close contact with wounds from war, sport, and arena combat. Broken bones, deep cuts, blunt force injuries, dislocations, infected wounds, and damaged eyes are not abstractions here. They are recurring problems. A fighter who survives one match may need weeks or months before another. Scars become a record of both danger and care. The dark truth is not that Rome never valued these bodies. It valued them in a cold and limited way, as instruments worth preserving because they could be used again. Yet care does not mean kindness. The school remains coercive. Men can be chained, punished, isolated, beaten, or watched closely. Some ludi may have been harsher than others, and the evidence does not allow a single picture for every place and period, but the logic of confinement is unmistakable. Gladiators are men trained to use weapons, often men with every reason to hate the system around them. Control must be constant. The architecture of a school reflects anxiety as much as organization. Cells, corridors, training yards, armories, and guarded exits all speak to the same fear the fighters are valuable, but they are also dangerous. Rome wants their courage on the sand, not in rebellion behind the walls. The most famous warning comes from Spartacus, though his story belongs to a later and larger storm. His revolt begins from a gladiator school in Capua, and the fact matters even when separated from legend. It shows what Roman society already knows but tries to contain men trained for violence and held under coercion can become something more than performers if the walls fail. Popular memory often turns Spartacus into a pure symbol of freedom, and some later versions add more certainty than the evidence can support. But at the root stands a real fear. The ludus is built to produce disciplined fighters, and discipline can serve more than one master if captivity breaks. Inside ordinary days, identity is slowly stripped and replaced. A man may no longer be primarily known by the place where he was born or the family he lost. He becomes a type, a rank, a style, a record of wins and losses. His body is trained into a role the crowd can recognize before it knows his name. The school teaches him how to enter, how to stand, how to wait, how to fight, how to fall, and perhaps how to ask for mercy without seeming cowardly. Even surrender has a grammar. Even defeat can be performed with dignity if the fighter understands what the audience expects. Survival depends not only on strength, but on reading the spectacle from within. There must have been friendships in such places, though the record rarely lets them speak clearly. Men who train together, eat together, suffer wounds together, and watch others leave for the arena without returning, do not remain strangers forever. Inscriptions sometimes hint at comradeship, affection, shared identity, and burial by fellow members of a troop or school. These small traces matter because they soften nothing while making everything more human. The ludus is a machine, but it is filled with men who remember pain, rivalry, loyalty, resentment, pride, and fear. Some may dream of freedom. Some may dream only of surviving the next match. Some may become proud of the very skill forced upon them. Human beings often build meaning even inside systems designed to use them. By the time the trained gladiator finally steps toward the gate, the crowd sees only the finished surface armor polished. weapon ready, body prepared, role understood. What it does not see are the repetitions in the yard, the barley in the bowl, the physician's hands, the trainer's corrections, the punishment cell, the whispered fear before sleep, the old name fading beneath the new one. The arena may last minutes, but the school lasts every day. That is where the spectacle is truly manufactured. Rome does not merely throw men into combat. It studies them, feeds them, confines them, repairs them, brands them with identity, and teaches them to make danger beautiful enough for applause. The school does not exist only because Rome loves combat. It exists because combat can be bought, leased, insured, advertised, scheduled, and turned into a business with ledgers behind the blood. Behind every polished helmet and every roar from the seat stands a quieter world of contracts, owners, brokers, trainers, craftsmen, doctors, animal handlers, builders, messengers, gamblers, and political sponsors who understand that spectacle is never free. The arena may look like a place where men gamble with life, but before a fighter ever risks his throat beneath the sun, other men have already calculated his value in money. His training has cost money. His food has cost money. His armor has cost money. His reputation can increase his price. His death can be a financial loss. The dark truth is that Rome does not merely enjoy gladiators. It organizes them into an economy where human danger becomes an asset. At the center of this economy stands the lanista, a figure both necessary and despised. The lanista owns, manages, buys, sells, trains, and hires out gladiators. Yet Roman society often treats him with moral suspicion. This is one of Rome's familiar hypocrisies. The crowd wants the games. Ambitious politicians want the applause that games can bring. Wealthy sponsors need trained fighters if their spectacles are to impress. Yet the man who handles the practical business of bodies and blood can be regarded as disreputable, close to the world of pimps, slave dealers, and professional exploiters. The lanista profits from what respectable society demands, while carrying some of the shame that respectable society prefers not to touch directly. His work requires calculation. A new recruit must be evaluated like raw material, but also like a possible future performer. Is he strong? Is he obedient? Is he too old? Does he have military experience? Can he be trained for a particular fighting style? Will the crowd remember him? Can he survive enough contests to repay the investment placed in him? The evidence remains incomplete, especially for the daily accounting of individual schools. But legal and literary traces make clear that gladiators could be hired for events rather than simply sacrificed. Sponsors did not always own the fighters they displayed. They might rent them from a troupe, paying different rates depending on quality, reputation, and risk. If a fighter died when he was not meant to die, compensation could matter. Even death might be priced. This turns the arena into a strange negotiation between generosity and expense. A politician or wealthy sponsor, often called the editor of the games, presents the spectacle to the people. He wants the event remembered. He wants the crowd to say that he was lavish, bold, and worthy of honor. But lavishness has a cost. Ordinary fighters are cheaper than famous ones. A veteran with victories behind him may draw attention, but also demand a higher fee. Rare pairings, elaborate armor, imported animals, musicians, attendants, executioners, scenery, awnings, and announcements all add to the burden. The public sees magnificence. The sponsor sees bills. The crowd may demand mercy for a popular fighter, but mercy can be expensive. The sponsor has already paid for danger and now must preserve a costly man for another day. Betting adds another layer, though the surviving evidence is scattered and often indirect. It is hard to imagine a Roman crowd watching skilled combat without wagers forming in voices, gestures, and private arrangements. A fighter's record matters. His school matters. His style matters. A retiarius known for speed against a heavily armoured secutor creates not only drama, but prediction. Graffiti from places such as Pompeii preserves the names and reputations of fighters, showing how closely some spectators followed them. A gladiator might be called a heartthrob, a champion, a victor, or a man who makes girls sigh. These casual scratches on walls are lesser monuments, but they reveal an audience that does not watch every combat as anonymous slaughter. People track careers, they choose favourites, they argue over outcomes. Where reputation exists, gambling is never far away. The business extends into objects as well. Gladiators become images. Their forms appear on lamps, mosaics, cups, knives, wall paintings, and cheap souvenirs. A man who is legally degraded can still become a marketable figure. Children may play with toy gladiators. Adults may decorate rooms with scenes of combat. Tavern walls may carry scratched names and boasts. The arena leaks into ordinary life until the spectacle no longer belongs only to the day of the games. It becomes part of domestic imagination. This is one of the more unsettling details of Roman culture. Public violence can become familiar enough to sit beside dinner, sleep, and household worship in miniature form. What begins as danger in the sand becomes decoration in clay and paint. Armourers and craftsmen occupy their own quiet place in this system. The equipment of a gladiator is not merely functional, it must be recognisable from a distance, impressive in sunlight, durable under blows, and suited to the drama of particular pairings. Helmets, shields, greaves, arm guards, belts, and weapons all require skill to produce and maintain. A dented helmet must be repaired. A cracked shield must be replaced. A sword must hold an edge but not break too easily. The visual language of the arena depends on craft. When the crowd sees a Mamillo or Thraex, it is seeing not only a fighter but the work of metal workers, leather workers, painters, and trainers who have made the body readable as a role. Medical care, too, belongs to the economy. A wounded gladiator is not simply a suffering man, though he is certainly that. He is a damaged investment. Keeping him alive can be profitable. Treating him well enough to return him to combat may matter more to the owner than compassion, but the result can still mean skilled attention. Roman medicine is practical, especially when dealing with wounds. Arena injuries offer repeated lessons in trauma cuts, fractures, punctures, blunt impacts, and infections. Some fighters may have received better treatment than many ordinary poor people, not because Rome valued their humanity more deeply, but because their bodies had been made economically useful. No single explanation fully accounts for all differences between schools, regions, and periods. Yet the pattern is clear: the system can preserve a man carefully for the purpose of risking him again. This makes the gladiator's life especially cruel in its contradictions. He is not always thrown away. He is maintained. He is fed, drilled, housed, repaired, promoted, and sometimes celebrated. But every act of maintenance points back toward use. The better he becomes, the more valuable he is. And the more valuable he is, the more carefully the system may keep him trapped. Fame can improve his conditions while tightening the chain. Skill can win applause while making escape less likely. Survival can become another form of profitability. By the imperial period, the business of blood is woven deeply into urban life. Announcements advertise upcoming games. Painted notices can list sponsors and attractions. Crowds arrive with expectations already shaped. The spectacle has become something Rome knows how to produce at scale. Yet beneath the noise sits the old arithmetic: bodies purchased, bodies trained, bodies risked, bodies repaired, bodies remembered, bodies replaced. The arena is a theatre of courage, but also a marketplace of vulnerability. Its most chilling secret is not that Romans paid to watch men fight. It is that they built an entire professional world capable of making human peril reliable, repeatable, and profitable, then surrounded that world with applause until the machinery almost disappeared behind the roar. The weapons of the arena are never just weapons. They are signals. Before a blow is struck, the crowd reads a fighter from across the sand the way it might read a military standard, a theatrical mask, or a statue in procession. A broad shield tells one story. A small, curved shield tells another. A net hanging loose from the hand changes the air around a man before he even casts it. A helmet with a high crest catches the sun and turns the head beneath it into something less personal and more symbolic. To modern eyes, gladiatorial equipment can seem like a collection of exotic costumes, arranged for spectacle more than function. But the truth is more precise and more troubling. Armour in the arena is designed to create drama, to shape movement, to limit and protect the body in carefully uneven ways, and to make violence visible enough that the crowd can understand the contest at a glance. A Roman soldier usually fights as part of a unit, protected by formation, discipline, and the collective pressure of men beside him. A gladiator fights inside a different logic. He is exposed as an individual, yet he is not free to fight in whatever style he prefers. He belongs to a category. The Mumillo carries a large rectangular shield and a short sword, often protected by a heavy helmet with a broad brim and crest. The Thrax, associated in Roman imagination with Thracian enemies, uses a smaller shield and a curved blade that can reach around defences in unsettling ways. The Hoplomachus evokes Greek-style equipment with spear and small shield. The Retiarius is almost naked by comparison, carrying a weighted net, a trident, and a dagger, protected by an arm guard and shoulder piece but without a helmet. The Secutor, built to chase him, wears a smooth, rounded helmet with small eye holes, less likely to catch in the net but suffocating and narrow in vision. These pairings are not accidental. They are engineered contrasts. The crowd loves contrast because contrast creates a story. Heavy against light, shield against net, sword against trident, pursuit against escape. A fighter with more armour may seem safer, yet he carries more weight and heat. A lightly armed man may seem vulnerable, yet he moves with speed and reach. The contest depends on a balance that is never truly equal, only dramatic. The Romans are not trying to create fairness in the modern sporting sense. They are trying to create tension. Each style has strengths clear enough for the audience to follow, and weaknesses dangerous enough to matter. The Retiarius must avoid being trapped in close quarters. The Secutor must close distance before his own helmet becomes a prison of breath and darkness. The Mumillo can absorb pressure behind his shield, but must not allow a nimble opponent to turn his bulk against him. What survives in images and equipment suggests a sophisticated combat language, though scholars still debate the exact rules and techniques of many matchups. The helmets are among the most revealing objects. They protect the skull and face, but they also dehumanize. A gladiator with his face hidden becomes a figure rather than a citizen, a moving emblem of role and danger. Some helmets are so enclosed that vision is reduced to a few openings, and breathing becomes labour under heat, fear, and effort. Inside bronze, sound changes. The crowd becomes a muffled roar. The fighter hears his own breath, the scrape of metal, the thud of impact against shield or helmet. The helmet saves him from cuts that might end the fight too quickly, but it also isolates him. It forces him to fight through narrowed sight while the crowd sees a shining form instead of a frightened expression. Rome protects the head while erasing the face. The exposed parts of the body are equally important. Gladiatorial armour often leaves large areas uncovered, especially the torso, thighs, or arms, depending on type. This seems reckless until one remembers the needs of spectacle. Fully armoured men would be harder to wound visibly and might produce duller contests. Completely unprotected men would die too quickly and waste training. The arena finds a middle ground where wounds are likely, blood is visible, but instant death is not always inevitable. Greaves protect one leg rather than both. An arm guard shields the weapon arm or casting arm. The shield covers much but not everything. Vulnerability is distributed with care. The body is not protected as a whole person. It is protected as a performer whose danger must remain legible. This is where skill becomes inseparable from inequality. A gladiator's style determines not only his weapons, but his rhythm, his risks, and even the kind of courage expected from him. The retiarius, often without helmet, shows his face to the crowd. He carries less protection, and may have been viewed by some Romans as a lower or stranger type, partly because he fights in a way that looks less like the honourable shield and sword combat associated with soldiers. Yet his style requires remarkable timing. Throwing a net in a confined combat space is not simple. Missing can be disastrous. Recovering from a failed cast while an armoured pursuer advances demands nerve and speed. A heavily armoured opponent may look more dignified, but he's also fighting against exhaustion and limited sight. No single explanation fully accounts for the social ranking of each type. But the matchups reveal how Roman spectators could admire skill while also ranking bodies according to costume, weapon, and symbolic dignity. Training must therefore be specialised. A man cannot simply be handed a trident one day, and a curved sword the next without changing his entire way of moving. Footwork, guard, distance, attack lines, and defensive habits all depend on equipment. The school studies the body and assigns it a role. A tall, agile man might be shaped one way, a compact, powerful man another. A fighter with particular instincts might be trained to exploit them. But assignment is not necessarily destiny chosen by the fighter himself. The lanista and trainers decide what the body is worth becoming. In that decision, practical judgment, market demand, and spectacle meet. A man's limbs, height, speed, and temperament become raw material for a role that may define the rest of his life. The weapons also carry Rome's memory of enemies. Some gladiator types preserve names or impressions linked to peoples Rome fought, feared, conquered, or imagined. By the imperial period, these labels no longer function as simple ethnic descriptions. A Thracian fighter may not be Thracian by birth. A style can outlive the historical enemy that inspired it, but the association matters. The arena turns old wars into repeatable images. Rome can watch versions of foreignness clash under Roman rules, contained inside Roman walls, judged by Roman crowds. It is conquest replayed as entertainment, stripped of its original chaos and made elegant enough to sell. Yet for the fighter beneath the symbol, elegance offers no comfort. A small mistake can open flesh. A shield held slightly too low can invite a curved blade. A stumble under heavy gear can turn a trained man into a helpless one. The match is theatrical, but the injuries are real. The balance is planned, but the outcome is not guaranteed. That uncertainty is the pulse of the arena. The crowd must believe that both men have a chance, even if their chances are shaped by equipment, status, experience, and the intentions of those who arrange the bout. So the polished armour reveals a deeper cruelty. Rome does not simply send men into danger, it designs their danger. It gives one man weight and protection, another speed and exposure. It hides one face and displays another. It creates the appearance of balance while preserving hierarchy, symbolism, and profit. The contest may be skillful, even beautiful in its discipline, but its beauty is built on controlled inequality. Every helmet, shield, blade, and bare patch of skin tells the same quiet truth in the arena. Even chance is carefully dressed before it is allowed to kill. The fighter who falls does not fall into silence. He falls into a storm of voices. A knee touches the sand, a shield drops, a hand rises, and suddenly the match is no longer only between two armed men. It expands outward into the amphitheatre, into the heat of thousands of bodies, into gestures, shouts, expectations, habits, prejudices, and the terrible pleasure of judgment. The crowd that has watched the fight now becomes part of the fight's ending. Rome has arranged the arena so that violence does not simply happen, it is witnessed, interpreted, and morally shaped in public. A wounded gladiator may still be breathing, still conscious, still capable of fear, but his fate can begin to leave his own body and pass into the hands of spectators, sponsors, and the highest authority present. This is one of the most unsettling features of the games. Death is not always an accident of combat. It can become a decision, and the decision is theatrical. A defeated gladiator who has fought poorly, shown cowardice, broken expectations, or failed to satisfy the audience may face a different mood than one who has fought with discipline and courage. Roman spectators are not simply waiting for slaughter. They are watching for conduct. They want to see endurance under pressure, skill under injury, and composure near death. What survives in the record suggests that a gladiator who displays courage can win sympathy even in defeat. A man who panics, turns away, or begs without dignity may lose it. The arena turns moral judgment into a public appetite. The exact mechanics of mercy remain debated. Modern imagination often reduces everything to a thumb turned up or down. But the evidence for those gestures is more complicated than the popular image suggests. Ancient sources mention signs, hands, fingers, and requests for death or release. Yet scholars still debate what specific gestures meant in different periods and settings. The famous modern idea of thumbs down for death and thumbs up for life may not match Roman practice neatly. Some evidence suggests that a hidden or pressed thumb could signal mercy, while an exposed thumb might represent the sword. The details remain incomplete, and it is safer to say that gestures mattered without pretending that every amphitheatre followed the same simple code now repeated in films. The uncertainty itself is revealing. The most famous sign of Roman cruelty is partly a modern reconstruction built from fragmentary, ancient clues. Yet the uncertainty of the gesture does not lessen the horror of the moment, whether by thumb, hand, voice, or command. The defeated fighter waits while others decide what his courage has earned. The sponsor of the games, the editor, holds formal power over the outcome, especially if he has paid for the event and the fighters. But he does not act in a vacuum. He feels the crowd. He hears approval or disgust. He knows that generosity can win admiration, and that severity can satisfy a thirst for justice, discipline, or spectacle. If the emperor is present, the stakes rise even further. The ruler's decision becomes a public image of power. Mercy can make him seem humane. Death can make him seem stern. Either choice can be political. The crowd itself is not one mind, though from the sand it may sound like one monstrous voice. Different sections of the amphitheatre may want different endings. Those close to the arena see more clearly the wounds, the exhaustion, the face if it is visible, the small signs of skill or failure. Those higher up may respond more to motion, reputation, and noise. Some spectators have favourites, some have wagers, some love a particular fighting style, some admire a famous veteran. Others may resent an expensive star who has been spared too many times. In such a place, judgment is emotional, but not random. The crowd has been trained by repeated spectacle to believe it can read worthiness in the final posture of a defeated man. There is cruelty in that belief, but also a strange demand for discipline. Roman society praises the ability to meet death steadily. Soldiers, aristocrats, philosophers, and condemned men are all judged, in different ways, by their composure before the end. The gladiator, though socially degraded, is pulled into that same moral theatre. If he loses well, he may become admirable. If he dies well, he may become memorable. This does not redeem the system, it makes the system sharper. Rome takes a man it has placed in mortal danger, and then judges whether he has endured that danger beautifully enough to deserve life. For the victor, the moment is also complex. He may stand over the defeated, ready but waiting, because even triumph is controlled by command. He has not simply won a private duel, he has performed within a hierarchy. He cannot always kill because he wants to kill, nor spare because he wants to spare. The final act belongs to the structure around him. If ordered to finish the defeated man, he must do it properly, with the trained efficiency expected by the audience. If mercy is granted, he must step back and let the spectacle close around survival instead of death. In either case, victory does not free him from obedience, it proves he can obey under applause. The defeated man's raised finger or hand, often understood as a request for mercy, may be the smallest and most human gesture in the entire arena. After all the armour, symbolism, training, and noise, there remains a person signalling that he is beaten and wishes to live. That simple fact cuts through the ceremony. He may be enslaved, condemned, contracted, famous, despised, admired, or unknown. But at that moment he's asking the system to let his body continue. The crowd's response turns survival into a gift, not a right. The dark truth is that the arena teaches everyone present that life can be made conditional in public, weighed like entertainment, and returned only when power chooses to return it. This public judgment helps explain why the games held such force in Roman imagination. They did not only show violence, they allowed participation without direct responsibility. A spectator could shout for mercy or death and feel part of a grand civic drama. A sponsor could follow the crowd and still appear decisive. An emperor could respond to public feeling while displaying absolute authority. The defeated man carried the consequence. The crowd carried the thrill. The system distributed emotion upward and danger downward. When the decision finally comes, the arena's noise changes. Mercy brings release, applause, perhaps disappointment from those who wanted a more final ending. Death brings a different satisfaction, darker and heavier, especially if the defeated man meets it as expected. Attendants will soon enter. The sand will be worked again. Another act may follow, yet for a few suspended breaths, the amphitheatre reveals itself with terrible clarity. Rome has gathered thousands of people not merely to watch whether a man can fight, but to decide what his fighting means. The crowd becomes a judge, but it is a judge protected from the cost of its own verdict. Beneath the bright order of the games lies that ancient and uncomfortable arrangement: many voices, one body, and a life held in the space between them. The most persistent image of the gladiator is a man walking into the arena with death already waiting for him, as if every match is meant to end with a corpse, and every cheer is a demand for blood. It is a powerful image, and not entirely false, because death is always present in the games. It waits in the exposed thigh, in the narrow eye holes of a helmet, in the tremor of an exhausted arm, in the decision of a sponsor, in the mood of a crowd that has decided courage was not enough. Yet the image is also too simple. The arena is not a slaughterhouse operating under the disguise of sport. It is stranger than that, more controlled, more calculating, and in some ways more disturbing. For trained gladiators, death is not always the intended result. Death is the shadow that makes the performance matter. A dead gladiator cannot fight again. This plain fact shapes much of the system. Trained fighters are expensive to produce and maintain. They require food, equipment, housing, instruction, guards, medical care, and time. A raw captive can be destroyed easily, but a skilled gladiator represents investment. He may develop a following. His name may appear in notices. His record may attract attention. His presence may help sell the spectacle before it even begins. To kill such a man casually is not only cruel, which Rome often tolerate, but wasteful, which Rome often dislikes. The business of blood depends on danger, but not necessarily on constant death. The most valuable fighter is alive, scarred, known, and capable of returning. This is where modern imagination often confuses different kinds of arena violence. Public executions, punishments by beasts, forced killings of condemned criminals, and professional gladiatorial combat could all occur in the same larger setting. But they did not carry the same logic. A condemned person thrown to animals in the morning may have little chance and little training. A criminal forced into a hopeless scene may be there to die as a warning. A gladiator match between trained fighters, by contrast, is built around skill, suspense, and controlled risk. Both are brutal. Both reveal Rome's comfort with public suffering. But they are not the same thing. No single explanation fully accounts for how every spectator distinguished them emotionally. Yet the structure of the event suggests that Romans understood the difference between execution and combat. The evidence for survival appears in inscriptions, graffiti, and records of fighters with multiple victories. Some gladiators are remembered with numbers attached to their careers, wins, draws, sometimes losses, sometimes age at death. These numbers are fragments, not full statistics, and scholars still debate how representative they are. The surviving evidence comes unevenly from different places, periods, and kinds of commemoration. Still, it shows something important. Gladiators could have careers. A man might fight again and again, building reputation with each appearance. Some died after only a few contests. Some lasted long enough to become veterans. A few may have retired with the wooden sword, the rudes, symbolizing release from the arena. The dark truth is not that every gladiator died immediately, but that survival itself became part of the spectacle's economy. The possibility of mercy also supports this. A defeated fighter could be spared if he'd fought well, if the sponsor chose leniency, if the crowd admired him, or if his owner's investment made survival desirable. Mercy was not kindness in the modern sense. It was conditional, public, and controlled by power. But its presence means that the arena did not require every defeat to end in death. A man could lose and live, though perhaps wounded, humiliated, and return to training. The crowd could enjoy the drama of judgment without always demanding the final act. The spectacle fed on suspense would skill triumph, would courage earn life, would the sponsor be generous, would a favourite be preserved, would a poor performance be punished. Death mattered most when it was possible, not automatic. This does not soften the cruelty. In some ways, it sharpens it. A system that kills everyone quickly is terrible, but simple. The gladiatorial world is more psychologically refined. It teaches men to live repeatedly under the threat of death. It asks them to prepare, fight, recover, and return. It lets them hope, because hope makes obedience easier and performance better. A gladiator who believes he can survive may train harder than a man certain he is being sent to slaughter. A crowd that knows a fighter might live becomes more invested in his career. The spectacle becomes cumulative. Scars and victories accumulate meaning. Every return to the arena carries memory with it. The wounds themselves were part of this balance. Gladiatorial armour often leaves flesh exposed in ways that allow injury without guaranteeing immediate death. Cuts could be dramatic. Blood could be visible. A wounded arm, leg, or shoulder could thrill the crowd while leaving the fighter alive if treated quickly. This was dangerous beyond calculation. Of course, infection, shock, hidden damage, and later complications could kill even after apparent survival. Ancient medicine could be skilled. But it was not magic. The evidence remains incomplete, and every generalization must be handled carefully. Yet the design of equipment and the economic logic of training both point toward a world where many matches aimed at a heightened risk of serious injury rather than certain killing. There may also have been rules, formal or informal, governing acceptable strikes, surrender, and endings. The details are difficult to reconstruct. We do not possess a complete gladiator rulebook. Much must be inferred from images, scattered texts, and the practical needs of the games. But professional combat almost always develops conventions, because without them, the product becomes uncontrollable. A fight that ends too fast may disappoint. A fighter killed in a clumsy or unauthorized way may cost money. A match that looks cowardly, unfair, or confusing may fail as spectacle. The arena needs danger disciplined into shape. Rules do not make violence humane. They make it repeatable. That repeatability is the key. Rome did not build its fascination with gladiators on an endless pile of anonymous corpses alone. It built it on recognizable danger, recurring names, controlled uncertainty, and the public testing of courage. Death remained essential because it gave the games their seriousness. Without the possibility of death, the arena would become mere athletic display. With too much death, it would destroy its own performers and flatten suspense into butchery. The games endured because they occupied the narrow and terrible space between sport and execution, between admiration and degradation, between survival and sacrifice. So the old image of the doomed gladiator must be adjusted, not erased. Many did die. Some died horribly. Some were executed rather than matched. Some were pushed into contests they did not choose and could not truly refuse. But many also survived, and that survival was not a sign of mercy at the heart of the system. It was part of the system's intelligence. The arena learned how to keep fear alive by not always letting the fighter die. Rome discovered that a man spared today could draw a larger crowd tomorrow, and that the threat hanging over him might be more profitable than his corpse. The sand needed blood, but it also needed memory. It needed men who could return carrying both. Fame in the arena grows in the stranger soil. It rises from chains, contracts, injuries, public shame, and the constant possibility of death. Yet it can shine brightly enough to cross class boundaries that Roman society usually guards with iron discipline. A gladiator is legally and morally degraded, marked by infamia, placed among performers, prostitutes, and others whose bodies are exposed for public use. Respectable men may condemn him as low. Moralists may point to him as a symptom of appetite and disorder. Yet the same society scratches his name on walls, paints his image in houses, follows his victories, desires his body, and sometimes mourns his death with words that sound almost tender. The cage does not prevent fame. In some ways, the cage creates it. The contradiction begins with visibility. Most people in the Roman world live and die with a little chance of being publicly known beyond their household. Neighbourhood, guild, unit, or village, a labourer, field slave, shop assistant, mule driver, washerwoman, or dock worker may work hard for decades and leave almost no trace in the record. A gladiator, even a man of low origin, can become visible to thousands in a single afternoon. His name can be announced. His style can become recognizable. His scars can become part of his reputation. His victories can be counted. If he fights well, he may pass from being merely another body in the sand to being a figure with followers. This fame is dangerous yet unstable and dependent on the same system that degrades him, but it is real enough to leave marks. Pompeii preserves some of those marks with unusual intimacy. On its walls, beneath ash and time, survive graffiti naming gladiators, praising them, teasing them, and turning them into objects of fascination. Some inscriptions call fighters victors. Others attach desire to their names with a bluntness that makes the ancient city feel suddenly close. These are not grand monuments commissioned by the state. They are casual writings, the ancient equivalent of public whispers, fan notes, boasts, and jokes. What survives in the record suggests that gladiators could become local celebrities, especially in cities where games were anticipated events and where the same names might circulate long before the day of combat. The evidence remains incomplete, but the emotional texture is unmistakable. The crowd did not always watch gladiators as interchangeable victims. It watched some of them as personalities. This celebrity is inseparable from the body. The gladiator's body is trained, displayed, wounded, controlled, and admired. It represents danger in human form. To elite Roman moralists, this admiration can seem troubling because it crosses boundaries. A man without honour in the legal sense can possess a kind of physical authority that respectable men envy and respectable women are warned against desiring. Stories of elite women attracted to gladiators may be exaggerated by hostile writers eager to mock female desire or moral decline, but their very existence reveals the anxiety. The gladiator is supposed to be beneath society, yet his courage, strength, and nearness to death make him compelling. Rome tries to place him low, but spectacle lifts him into view. This is not admiration without cruelty. The crowd's love can be possessive, shallow, and temporary. A favourite who loses badly may become a disappointment. A fighter admired for courage still remains available for judgment. A famous man can be cheered one day and condemned another. Celebrity does not free him from the school, the contract, the owner, or the editor's decision. If anything, fame may make his danger more valuable. A known gladiator is worth seeing precisely because the audience has something to lose when he falls. His death would mean more than the death of an unknown beginner. The system understands this. It can cultivate recognition, then place that recognition at risk. The crowd's affection becomes another tool for sharpening suspense. Images of gladiators spread far beyond the amphitheatre. They appear on oil lamps that would have flickered in ordinary rooms, on cups held at tables, on mosaics underfoot, on wall paintings, on small objects that carry the arena into daily life. A household might live with gladiator images not as shocking intrusions, but as familiar decoration. This ordinary presence is one of the lesser-known details that reveals how deeply the games entered Roman imagination. The arena was not confined to the day of spectacle. It returned at night in lamplight, in jokes, in children's play, in tavern talk, in the naming of favourites, in the repeated shapes of shield, helmet, net, and trident. Public violence became portable memory. Some gladiators were commemorated in death with epitaphs that give them a dignity the law denied. A stone might name a fighter, record his age, mention his victories, identify his fighting type, or preserve the grief of a wife, companion, or fellow gladiator. These inscriptions are often modest, but they complicate the image of men entirely stripped of human connection. Some had relationships. Some belonged to communities inside the gladiatorial world. Some were buried by comrades who knew what their victories had cost. Scholars still debate how typical these commemorated lives were, because inscriptions naturally favour those remembered by someone with resources or affection. Still, every surviving name pushes against anonymity. Each one says that beneath the helmet stood a person whose life could not be fully contained by spectacle. Fame could also distort identity. A gladiator's public name might not be his birth name. Stage names, fighting types, ethnic labels, and nicknames could replace earlier histories. A man might be remembered less as someone's son from a particular town than as Murmillo with a certain number of victories, or as a Retiarius whose skill excited crowds. This is both preservation and erasure. The arena gives him a name worth scratching into plaster, but perhaps not the name his mother used. It grants him visibility while reshaping him into what the audience wants to remember. No single explanation fully accounts for whether such reinvention felt empowering, humiliating, or both. For some fighters, The arena identity may have been a mask forced upon them. For others, it may have become the only identity through which they could gain recognition in a world that had already taken everything else. The deeper contradiction is that Roman society admires in gladiators qualities it claims to value in its highest men: courage, discipline, endurance, contempt for death, mastery of the body under pressure. Yet it refuses to grant gladiators the honour attached to those virtues when displayed by citizens, soldiers, or statesmen. The same act can mean glory in one body and infamy in another. A senator facing danger for Rome may be celebrated as noble. A gladiator facing danger for a crowd remains polluted by the fact that his body is for sale. The arena therefore reveals how Roman virtue is never just about behaviour, it is also about status. Courage matters, but who possesses it matters just as much. That's why gladiator fame feels so unstable and haunting. It lifts men without freeing them. It makes them desirable without making them respectable. It preserves their names while consuming their bodies. It allows the crowd to admire bravery in those it helps in danger. In the shining moment of applause, a fighter may seem almost powerful, standing alone before thousands who know his name. But the walls are still there. The school waits. The owner calculates. The next match approaches. Fame inside the arena is not an escape from the cage. It is the golden light falling through the bars. Beyond the familiar image of armoured men circling under the sun, the arena also contains figures who appear only briefly in the evidence, but whose presence changes the shape of the whole story. They stand at the edges of the spectacle: women who fight, performers displayed as oddities, people forced into roles meant to amuse, shock, or humiliate, and combatants whose rarity is precisely what makes them valuable to the crowd. Rome's arena is not only a place for repeated traditions, it is also a place where novelty can be weaponized. The public comes expecting known patterns, but it also hungers for the unusual, the scandalous, the impossible arrangement that makes thousands lean forward at once. In that hunger, the arena reveals not only its appetite for violence, but its appetite for bodies made strange. Female gladiators are among the most fascinating and most debated of these figures. The evidence for them is real, but limited. A few literary references, legal restrictions, and visual traces suggest that women did sometimes fight in the arena, though never as the common centre of the gladiatorial system. They were rare enough to be noticed, rare enough to be controversial, and rare enough that scholars still debate how often they appeared, under what conditions, and whether they were trained like male gladiators or presented more often as exceptional spectacles. What survives in the record suggests that they existed, but the evidence remains incomplete. Their rarity should not be exaggerated into a hidden army of female fighters. Yet it should not be dismissed as fantasy either. Rome, in its taste for display, was capable of turning even the breaking of its own gender expectations into entertainment. One of the most famous visual clues is a relief often interpreted as showing two female fighters, labelled with names usually read as Achillea and Amazon. They stand with shields and weapons, without helmets. Their bodies presented in a way that seems both martial and theatrical. The names themselves are revealing. They do not simply identify two ordinary women. They evoke heroic and mythic associations, especially the world of Amazons. Those legendary warrior women who haunted Greek and Roman imagination as both fascinating and unsettling. If the interpretation is correct, the fighters are not just women with weapons. They are being framed through myth, turned into living images of a world where gender order bends under the pressure of spectacle. The arena does not merely show them fighting, it makes their fighting meaningful by surrounding it with old stories of dangerous women. For Roman moralists, this could be disturbing. Elite Roman ideals often place respectable women within the household, under expectations of modesty, chastity, fertility, and family honour. Of course, real women's lives were far more varied than ideals admit, especially across class, region, and status. but the symbolic order remains powerful. A woman appearing in the arena threatens that order because the arena is already a place of exposure, danger, and shame. A male gladiator is degraded by making his body public. A female gladiator intensifies the shock because her body enters a space coded as masculine, violent, and morally suspect. Some ancient writers mention female performers in the games with tones of disgust or satire, especially when women of higher status are imagined or accused of entering the arena. Such accounts may exaggerate for moral effect, but the anxiety behind them is clear. A woman fighting before a crowd does not simply entertain Rome, she unsettles Rome's story about itself. Yet not all female arena appearances should be imagined in the same way. Some may have been trained combatants, others may have appeared in novelty events, mythological reenactments, or staged hunts. Some may have been enslaved or compelled. A few may have been volunteers drawn by money, pressure, or spectacle, though the evidence is too thin to speak with certainty. No single explanation fully accounts for their presence. What matters is that the arena could absorb them into its machinery. Whether admired, mocked, eroticized, condemned, or treated as marvels, they were made visible under conditions controlled by others. Their rarity did not protect them from exploitation, it made them more marketable. The arena also displayed other bodies considered unusual, marginal, or socially exposed. Ancient spectacles could include dwarfs, disabled performers, exoticized captives, people dressed in mythological costume, or combatants arranged for comic, grotesque, or symbolic effect. The details are scattered and sometimes filtered through elite authors who exaggerate or sneer, so caution is necessary. Still, the broader pattern is undeniable. Rome often turned difference into display. The same public that loved disciplined combat also enjoyed surprise, inversion, and humiliation. The amphitheatre could become a place where the empire gathered not only defeated peoples, but unusual bodies, rare animals, strange costumes, and staged impossibilities, then placed them under the gaze of the many. This appetite for novelty appears most clearly in the way emperors and sponsors compete to astonish. Ordinary gladiator pairs remain the backbone of the games, but extravagance requires more than repetition. A sponsor who can present something never seen before, or rarely seen, gains a sharper kind of fame. The crowd remembers the unusual. It tells the story afterward in baths, shops, taverns, and streets. Women fighters, mock battles, exotic animals, mythic punishments, unusual pairings, and rare performers all serve that memory. The arena becomes a theatre of exception, where the normal rules of Roman life can be temporarily broken under the supervision of power. That supervision is crucial. Rome can tolerate disorder as spectacle when authority controls the frame. For the people inside that frame, the experience is harder to recover. A woman entering the arena may feel fear, pride, shame, calculation, or numb obedience. An unusual performer may be aware that the crowd sees not a person, but a marvel or joke. A captive dressed as a mythological enemy may know nothing of the story being imposed upon his body. The record rarely preserves their thoughts. It preserves the fact of display more easily than the feeling of being displayed. This silence is part of the darkness. The more unusual the performer, the more the sources tend to treat that person as an event rather than a life. Still, these rare fighters and performers reveal something essential about the arena's power. The games do not merely reflect Roman society, they test its boundaries. They ask what can be shown, who can be exposed, which bodies can be made meaningful, and how far spectacle can go before disgust becomes part of the pleasure. Female gladiators, outcasts, and novelty combatants stand at the unstable edge where admiration, ridicule, erotic curiosity, moral outrage, and violence blur together. They remind us that the arena was not only a machine for trained male combat, it was a machine for turning human difference into public consumption. And so the dark truth widens. The sand does not only hold warriors and prisoners, it holds Rome's need to classify, display, possess, and judge. It can take a woman and make her an Amazon, take a captive and make him a symbol, take a disabled or unusual body and make it an attraction, take shame and sell it as wonder. The familiar gladiator already lives inside a cage of fame and danger, but these rarer figures show that the cage has many doors. Some enter through conquest, some through punishment, some through desperation, and some through the Roman hunger to see the world turn strange under controlled light. The crowd calls it spectacle. The bodies at the centre know it as exposure. Before the trained gladiators take the afternoon light, the arena often belongs to a different kind of terror. Morning can open not with the measured duel of skilled fighters, but with animals dragged from the edges of the known world, condemned people prepared for death, hunters armed for display, and punishment staged so publicly that fear becomes a civic lesson. The amphitheatre is not only a school of courage, it is also a theatre of domination over nature, criminals, captives, and the imagination itself. To understand gladiators without this surrounding world is to see only the most disciplined face of the arena. Beneath and around them lies something rougher, more chaotic, and often more openly cruel the Venations, the beast hunts, and the executions that turn the sand into a map of Roman power. The animals arrive from everywhere Rome can reach or claim to reach. Lions from North Africa, leopards, bears, bulls, boars, ostriches, crocodiles, elephants, and other creatures appear in Roman spectacles, sometimes singly, sometimes in astonishing numbers. Their presence is not merely zoological curiosity. Each animal carries a message. The empire can command distant landscapes. It can take the desert, forest, mountain, river, and savanna. Then bring their living symbols into the city to be killed, displayed, or mastered. To the crowd, an elephant may be wonder, a lion terror, a leopard speed, a bear brute force. To the sponsor, each beast is proof of reach and expense. To the animal, of course, none of this symbolism matters. It is trapped in a roaring stone world driven by fear, noise, hunger, pain, and confusion. The logistics behind these hunts are staggering, capturing large wild animals alive, transporting them across sea and land, feeding them, containing them, and releasing them at the proper moment requires a whole network of hunters, traders, handlers, cages, ships, roads, and imperial command. The evidence remains incomplete in many details, but the scale described in ancient sources suggests that the arena's appetite placed real pressure on animal populations in some regions. Scholars still debate the exact ecological effects, and it would be too simple to claim that Roman games alone erased whole species everywhere they operated. Yet there is little doubt that repeated mass capture and killing reflected an imperial confidence that nature itself could be consumed for spectacle. The arena teaches the crowd that the wild world exists to be brought under Roman eyes. The venatores, the professional beast fighters or hunters, occupy a place beside but not identical to gladiators. They may be skilled, athletic, and admired, but their performance follows a different rhythm. A duel between two trained gladiators creates suspense through matched human intention. A hunt against animals creates suspense through unpredictability. Animals do not obey the script. They panic, charge, freeze, climb, lash out, or refuse the dramatic behaviour expected of them. Handlers and stage workers must force the event back into shape. The result can be thrilling, but also grotesque, because the crowd watches not only combat, but confusion turned into entertainment. A beast that refuses to attack may disappoint. A beast that attacks too effectively may terrify. The arena wants wildness, but only wildness controlled enough to be useful. Sometimes the setting itself is transformed. Trees, painted scenery, artificial hills, pools, rocks, and mechanical lifts can create the illusion of distant landscapes. The sand becomes a forest, a desert, a mythic wilderness, or a conquered province compressed into one bright field of death. This theatricality is important. The arena does not merely kill animals, it stages the world. Roman spectators can sit in ordered ranks, while nature appears below them as something arranged, entered, and destroyed on command. What survives in the record suggests that elaborate scenic effects were possible, especially in major venues with imperial resources. The hidden machinery under the arena floor, with cages, lifts, doors, and corridors, turns surprise into technology. A lion can appear as if born from the earth, but behind the miracle stand carpenters, slaves, handlers, and terrified animals waiting in darkness. Executions bring an even darker purpose. Condemned people may be killed during public games in ways designed to match their crime, mock their status, or recreate mythological scenes. Some are exposed to beasts. Some are burned. Some are forced into hopeless combat. Some may be dressed as figures from legend so that their deaths become a form of narrative punishment. The details vary across time and place, and ancient authors sometimes describe extremes to make moral or political points. So caution is necessary. Still, the central reality is secure. The arena serves as a place where the state and its representatives turn punishment into spectacle. Death becomes not only a sentence, but a performance before witnesses. This is where the contrast with gladiators becomes sharpest. A trained gladiator may have a chance to survive. He has skill, equipment, a role, and sometimes a name known to the crowd. A condemned person sent to die in the arena often has none of these protections. The point may be precisely the absence of a fair contest. Public execution says that the condemned body has been removed from ordinary human claims. It can be used as warning, entertainment, purification, or political theatre. The crowd may see justice. Modern eyes may see cruelty. Both perceptions matter, because the arena depends on a society willing to treat some deaths as meaningful, only because power has named them so. The morning programme can therefore carry a harsher emotional texture than the gladiator duels that follow. Beast hunts display Roman mastery over nature and empire. Executions display mastery over criminals, rebels, outsiders, and the condemned. Gladiatorial fights display discipline under mortal risk. Together, they create a full day of ordered violence, moving from domination over animals and the dishonoured to the more complex drama of trained combat. No single explanation fully accounts for every spectator's reaction. Some may have watched with delight, others with boredom, others with horror held privately behind a public face. But the structure of the day suggests a progression in which different kinds of bodies are assigned different kinds of danger. There is a lesser-known sadness in the animals themselves. Roman writers occasionally notice moments when beasts behave in ways that disturb the expected spectacle, elephants appearing to plead, animals showing fear, or crowds reacting unexpectedly to their suffering. Such accounts may be shaped by literary purpose, but they hint at a tension inside the games. The arena depends on turning living beings into symbols, yet living beings do not always remain symbols. A frightened animal can suddenly seem less like imperial treasure and more like a creature trapped far from its world. A condemned person can suddenly seem less like a legal category and more like a body in pain. The spectacle works hardest where recognition threatens to break through. By the time the afternoon gladiators appear, the sand has already carried many meanings. It has been forest, execution ground, hunting field, punishment stage, imperial map, and theatre of wonders. The crowd has already learned the day's lesson. Rome can gather the dangerous, the foreign, the wild, the criminal, and the dishonoured, then arrange them under sunlight for judgment and destruction. Gladiators are part of this world, but they are not its whole truth. Around their famous duels stretches a wider darkness, one in which the arena consumes not only fighters, but animals, captives, stories, landscapes, and the very idea of mercy. Morning horror prepares the eye. By the time skilled men raise their swords, the crowd has already been taught to watch suffering as order. When an emperor gives games, he is not merely offering entertainment, he is placing himself at the centre of a vast public bargain. The crowd receives food, spectacle, shade if fortune and rank allow it, hours of astonishment, and the intoxicating feeling that imperial power has turned the world into a gift. In return, the emperor receives something less visible but more valuable attention, gratitude, obedience, and the public image of a ruler whose hand can provide abundance as easily as it can order death. The arena becomes a political language spoken in blood, stone, animals, armour, and applause. No speech in the Senate can reach as many bodies at once. No coin portrait can equal the living force of tens of thousands looking down at the same spectacle and knowing who paid for it. The emperor's presence changes the emotional temperature of the amphitheatre. If he sits in the imperial box, he becomes both spectator and symbol, a man watching the games and also the human source from which the games appear to flow. He does not need to fight. He does not need to shout. His stillness can be part of the performance. Below him, men risk their bodies. Around him, the crowd measures his reactions. A gesture of mercy can ripple through the seats as proof of clemency. A refusal can make severity visible. Lavishness can suggest prosperity. Exotic animals can suggest conquest. An orderly program can suggest that the empire itself is under control. In the arena, even generosity carries a warning. The ruler who can give such wonders can also take life away. This is why the games matter so deeply to imperial politics. Rome is too large, too unequal, and too full of memory to be governed by force alone. Emperors need rituals that make power feel natural. The arena helps. It gathers the city by rank, placing the social order in stone. Senators and elites sit where they are meant to sit. Ordinary citizens occupy their appointed places. Women, foreigners, the poor, and others are arranged according to rules that shift across time, but always remind viewers that status has a geography. At the centre are bodies with least power of all enslaved fighters, condemned criminals, captured animals, and performers exposed for the many. The building itself becomes a diagram of Roman hierarchy, with the emperor above danger and the dishonoured beneath every gaze. The Colosseum, begun under Vespasian and opened under Titus, makes this political message monumental. It rises on land associated with Nero's private palace, transforming a hated symbol of imperial excess into a public amphitheatre. That act is not accidental. It tells Rome that the new dynasty gives back what Nero had taken for himself. The very location speaks before the first fight begins. When Titus inaugurates the amphitheatre with lavish games, the spectacle is more than celebration. It is dynastic repair, propaganda in stone and sand. Ancient accounts describe extraordinary events, though scholars still debate details, numbers, and exaggerations in the sources. What survives in the records suggests that the opening of such a monument was meant to declare a restored relationship between ruler and people. The emperor gives the crowd a world to watch, and in doing so asks them to see him as the centre of that world. Bread and games is a phrase often repeated, sometimes too easily, as if Roman political life can be reduced to bribing hungry people with grain and distraction. The reality is more complex. Spectacle does not erase political tensions, food shortages, military crises, taxation, succession fears, or elite rivalries. But games can shape the mood in which those pressures are felt. They offer release, memory, and public contact between ruler and ruled. An emperor who neglects the crowd risks appearing distant. An emperor who overindulges in spectacle risks seeming cruel, frivolous, or desperate. The balance is delicate. The games can strengthen authority, but they can also expose weakness if the crowd senses disorder, stinginess, or bad judgment. Some emperors understand this better than others. Augustus uses public spectacle carefully, embedding entertainment within a broader image of moral renewal and restored order. Claudius, Nero, Domitian, Trajan, Commodus, and others leave different marks on the arena tradition, some through lavishness, some through eccentricity, some through acts that ancient writers report with hostility or fascination. Commodus is especially infamous for entering the arena himself, presenting his own body as gladiator and beast slayer, though safely protected by imperial privilege. The details are filtered through sources that despised him, and caution is necessary, but the scandal makes sense. A ruler may command the arena, sponsor it, judge it, and appear above it. But when he lowers himself into its roles, he threatens the symbolic distance that gives imperial power dignity. The emperor may play with death, but he is not supposed to become one of the exposed bodies. The arena also allows emperors to display conquest without sending the crowd to war. Captive peoples, foreign animals, military themes, and staged battles turn the empire's edges into visible trophies. A spectator who will never see the Nile, the forests of Germania, the deserts of Africa, or the mountains beyond the frontier can encounter fragments of them under Roman control. The spectacle compresses geography. It says that the distant world comes to Rome, and Rome decides what happens to it. This is imperial imagination made physical. The crowd does not need a map. It sees a leopard, an elephant, a painted landscape, a prisoner in foreign dress, a gladiator type named after an old enemy, and understands that power has reach. Fear is part of the message, but it is rarely naked fear. It is dressed as order, justice, generosity, and ritual. Public executions warn criminals and rebels. Beast hunts show nature subdued. Gladiator contests show courage disciplined within rules. The emperor's hand hovers over all of it. He appears as giver, judge, conqueror, father, and master of the boundary between life and death. No single explanation fully accounts for how every viewer processed this theatre of authority. Some may have felt sincere gratitude. Some may have loved the games apart from politics. Some may have understood the bargain cynically. But the structure itself is unmistakable. The games teach that power is most complete when it can make domination feel like a festival. And yet there is danger for the ruler, too. A crowd gathered in enormous numbers is never entirely passive. It can shout requests, express anger, demand mercy, praise favourites, mock officials, and turn its collective mood into pressure. The amphitheatre gives emperors visibility, but visibility cuts both ways. A badly judged decision can be remembered. A failure of generosity can sting. A riot can begin where excitement turns sharp. The crowd is not sovereign, but neither is its silent stone. The arena is one of the few places where the Roman masses can make their voice physically overwhelming, and wise rulers listen even while pretending to command. So the politics of the arena rests on a dark exchange. The emperor gives spectacle to the people, and the people give attention back to power. Violence becomes loyalty scenery. Mercy becomes publicity. Death becomes a lesson arranged beneath awnings and sunlight. The gladiator standing in the sand may seem to be the centre of the day, but above him sits the larger performance, a ruler proving that the empire can gather the world. rank the crowd, judge the condemned, spare the brave, slaughter the wild, and make all of it appear as a gift. In that sense, the arena is not only where Rome watches violence, it is where Rome watches itself being ruled. Long after the crowd has gone silent, long after the awnings rot away, the painted notices fade, the wooden training posts disappear, and the last roar of an amphitheatre becomes only an idea inside ruined stone. The bodies remain. They lie beneath later streets, beneath fields, beneath museum labels, beneath the careful brushes of archaeologists who work slowly because the dead no longer perform for anyone. The written record tells one kind of story about gladiators, shaped by elite opinions, public memory, moral judgment, and the appetite for vivid scenes. Bones tell another. They do not speak clearly, and they do not answer every question placed before them, but they preserve traces that spectacle could not erase: healed fractures, cut marks, blunt force injuries, patterns of diet, age at death, burial treatment, and the quiet evidence of lives lived under repeated danger. One of the most important discoveries associated with gladiators comes from Ephesus, in modern Turkey, where a cemetery has been widely interpreted as belonging to gladiators. The site has become famous because it offers something rare, not simply images of fighters or stories about them, but bodies that may have belonged to the men themselves. The evidence has been studied carefully, and while scholars still debate details, the burial context, inscriptions, injury patterns, and skeletal analysis together suggest a community closely tied to the arena. Here the dark truth becomes physical. The gladiator is no longer only a helmeted figure on a mosaic. He is a skull with trauma, a femur with muscle attachments, a jaw that once chewed the food of the school, a spine that carried armour, a body that survived some wounds and did not survive others. The injuries are among the most revealing clues. Some skeletons show healed wounds, meaning the men lived after serious damage. This confirms what the logic of the profession already suggests. Trained gladiators were not always killed in their first or second appearance. They could recover, return, and accumulate scars like a second skin. A healed fracture is a small biography written in bone. It says there was pain, treatment, time, and survival. It may also say there was no escape, because healing could prepare a man for another contest. Other injuries appear more final. Some skulls show wounds consistent with powerful blows, sharp weapons, or execution-like finishing strikes. Interpreting these marks is difficult, and the evidence remains incomplete. A wound's angle, depth, and location can suggest a weapon or circumstance. But certainty is rare. Still, the bodies confirm that the arena's violence was not decorative. It entered bone. One pattern often discussed is the difference between injuries that look controlled and injuries that look chaotic. Professional combat leaves different traces than massacre, battlefield panic, or ordinary accident. Some wounds may align with known gladiatorial weapons or with the finishing of a defeated fighter. Blows to the head can suggest moments when helmets were absent, removed, or ineffective. Injuries to limbs can reflect the exposed areas left by gladiatorial armour. The body becomes a map of equipment. Where armour protected, bone may be spared. Where flesh was open, damage appears. No single skeleton can reconstruct an entire match, but many bodies together begin to show the hidden logic of designed vulnerability. Diet leaves another kind of trace. Chemical analysis of bones from suspected gladiators has suggested a diet rich in plants and carbohydrates, with substantial reliance on grains and legumes. This supports ancient references to gladiators as barley eaters, though the phrase may have carried insult as well as description. Even more surprising is evidence that some may have consumed mineral-rich supplements, perhaps ash-based drinks, to help maintain bone strength after intense training and injury. Scholars still debate how widely such practices applied, and one cemetery cannot represent every gladiator across the empire, but the possibility is striking. It suggests that the men were maintained with practical care, not out of tenderness, but because the system needed bodies that could endure damage and return to use. This image of the gladiator as a heavily muscled figure eating meat before battle may therefore be misleading. Many fighters may have lived on food that was simple, dense, and designed for endurance rather than elite taste. Barley, beans, and other staples could build mass and support training. A body padded with fat as well as muscle might survive cuts more easily than a lean heroic statue would suggest. The arena admired the appearance of strength, but the school may have cared more about durability. The dark truth is almost clinical. The gladiator body was engineered for repeated harm. Medical traces deepen the contradiction. Some injuries show signs of treatment and healing. Roman medicine, especially in contexts of war and trauma, could be practical and skilled. Wounds might be cleaned, bones set, damaged tissue treated, and recovery managed. The physician connected to gladiators occupied an intimate place in the machinery of spectacle. He worked to preserve life, but often so that life could be risked again. A healed wound, seen from this angle, is both hopeful and bleak. It means someone cared enough, or invested enough, to keep the man alive. It also means the system had reason to return him to danger. Compassion and calculation are difficult to separate in such evidence. Burial itself adds another layer. Gladiators, despite their degraded status, were not always discarded without care. Some received marked graves, some were buried with attention, perhaps by comrades, associations, families, or those connected to the school. Epitaphs can name them, count victories, mention age, or preserve grief. This does not mean all gladiators were honoured equally in death. Many surely disappeared without inscription, especially the poorest, the condemned, or those killed far from anyone who wished or could afford to remember them. But the graves that survive show that the arena did not fully erase personal bonds. The men who fought as types could still be buried as individuals. The archaeological evidence also corrects the fantasy of constant heroic death. Many gladiators appear to have died young, but not all died instantly in the arena. Some may have succumbed to wounds later. Some may have died from infection, training accidents, illness, or punishment. Some injuries healed badly. Some bodies show the cumulative toll of harsh physical life. The evidence does not allow a neat, universal life story. What survives suggests variety. Professional care and brutal exposure, community and confinement, fame and bodily ruin. Every bone refuses the simple version. Standing over such remains, the arena changes scale. The vast amphitheatre shrinks to the width of a rib, the angle of a cut, the mineral signature left by food, the quiet curve of a healed fracture. Rome's spectacle was designed to make violence public, dramatic and controlled, but archaeology makes it intimate again. It returns the gladiator from symbol to body. The crowd saw armour flash in the sun. The bones remember the weight beneath it. The crowd heard judgment. The bones record impact. The crowd watched men become stories. The graves remind us that before they were stories, they were living bodies forced to carry Rome's hunger for spectacle in muscle, scar and bone. The end of the gladiatorial games does not arrive like a gate slamming shut. It comes slowly, unevenly, across generations, in laws that are not always obeyed, in city that can no longer afford old extravagance, in rulers who have other needs, in moral arguments that grow louder, and in an empire whose confidence begins to change shape. The arena remains powerful for a long time after the first doubts appear. Crowds still gather, amphitheatres still stand. Sponsors still understand the language of spectacle. But beneath the old roar, something shifts. The world that created the professional gladiator begins to weaken in the very systems that sustained him conquest. Urban wealth, civic competition, imperial abundance, and a shared belief that public violence can display order without staining the civilization that arranges it. Economics is one of the least romantic but most important forces in this decline. Gladiator games are expensive. Trained fighters cost money. Animals cost money. Transport, guards, armour, medical care, food, musicians, attendants, advertisements, and building maintenance all cost money. In the High Empire, when conquests, taxation, elite wealth, and civic rivalry flow strongly through Roman cities, such costs can be turned into prestige. A sponsor who spends lavishly buys memory and honour. An emperor who gives grand games turns expense into political theatre. But as pressures increase across the empire, the old arithmetic becomes harder. Cities face financial strain. Local elites become less willing or less able to pour fortunes into spectacles. Imperial resources are pulled toward armies, frontiers, bureaucracy, and crisis. The arena does not vanish because Rome suddenly becomes gentle. It fades partly because reliable extravagance becomes harder to sustain. Military change matters as well. The early and middle growth of gladiatorial spectacle is tied, directly or indirectly, to a world of conquest that produces captives, wealth, and confidence. Rome's wars feed the imagination of domination. Foreign bodies, foreign animals, and foreign landscapes enter the arena as trophies. But as the empire settles, defends, fragments, and struggles, conquest no longer supplies the same endless promise. The frontiers become more demanding. Civil wars and usurpations drain resources. The army becomes an even more consuming institution. Public violence does not disappear, but its meanings shift. The empire still punishes, still kills, still stages power, yet the elaborate professional duel may begin to seem like an old form belonging to an earlier confidence. Politics changes too. The games had served the Republic's aristocratic competition and the empire's relationship between ruler and crowd. But imperial government evolves, courts move, capitals shift. Rome itself is no longer always the unquestioned centre of political gravity. Emperors spend more time near frontiers or in other administrative centres. Local traditions persist, but the relationship between spectacle and authority becomes less stable. In some places, amphitheatres continue to function. In others they threaten. They fall into partial disuse, are adapted, quarried for stone, or repurposed over time. The evidence remains incomplete and varies by region, which matters greatly. There is no single final afternoon when every arena across the Roman world falls silent at once. Decline is geographical, social, and uneven. Then comes Christianity, not as the only cause, but as a force that changes the moral atmosphere in which the games are defended. Christian criticism of blood spectacle appears early, and it grows sharper as Christianity gains influence. Christian writers condemn the arena for cruelty, idolatry, moral corruption, and the delight taken in suffering. They do not always separate gladiatorial combat, beast hunts, theatre, and other spectacles in exactly the way modern categories might. They often attack the entire culture of public entertainment as spiritually dangerous. Their arguments matter more once Christian emperors and officials begin to shape law and public policy. Yet it would be too simple to say Christianity alone ends the games overnight. Some Christian emperors still tolerate forms of spectacle. Some violent entertainments continue in altered forms. Public punishment does not disappear. What changes is the ability of gladiatorial combat to present itself as normal, honourable, and central to civic life without serious moral challenge. Imperial laws against gladiatorial practices appear in stages, and their enforcement is not always clear. This is another place where scholars still debate chronology, meaning, and practical effect. A law can reveal disapproval without proving immediate disappearance. An imperial ban may be repeated because earlier restrictions failed, or because practices continued in some form. The famous association between Christian rulers and the end of gladiatorial combat is broadly important. But the lived reality was likely messier. Spectacles shrink, change, migrate, or survive locally before fading. The arena's death is not a clean moral victory written in one decree. It is a slow erosion of habit, funding, legitimacy, and supply. Public taste also changes, though taste is difficult to measure. The crowd that once roared for gladiators does not simply become modern. Romans and post-Roman peoples remain capable of harsh punishments and violent entertainments. Chariot racing, theatrical shows, beast displays, and executions continue to hold attention in different ways. But the professional gladiator duel loses its old centrality. The figure who once embodied courage under public danger becomes less necessary to the political and symbolic life of the state. Other spectacles serve other needs, other rituals gather the people, other forms of power take the stage. A society can abandon one cruelty while preserving many others. The amphitheatres themselves become witnesses to this transformation. Some are repaired, some decay, some are converted into fortresses, housing, workshops, markets, shrines, or sources of building stone. Their arches remain, but their meaning changes. Grass grows where sand once needed raking. Animals graze where animals once died. Houses lean against walls that once held crowds. The architecture of spectacle becomes the quarry of later survival. This afterlife is one of the most haunting details of the arena's decline. Rome built these places to make violence unforgettable, yet time turns them into ruins where the violence must be reconstructed from fragments. For the gladiator, the fading of the games is not simply liberation in any easy sense. By the time professional combat declines, the broader Roman world still contains slavery, poverty, punishment, war, coercion, and brutal labour. Men who might once have been sent to the arena could instead be absorbed into other harsh systems. Ending the spectacle does not end human exploitation, but it does close a particular institution, one that trained bodies for public combat and made their danger into civic ceremony. The disappearance of that institution matters because it shows that even traditions that seem permanent can depend on fragile conditions. Money, belief, law, politics, and appetite must all continue feeding the machine. When enough of them fail, even the loudest arena can fall quiet. The dark truth of the decline is that Rome does not outgrow violence so much as rearrange it. Gladiators fade because the world around them changes, not because cruelty is defeated in the human heart. The old games become harder to justify, harder to fund, harder to supply, and less central to power. The raw thins, the schools empty, the weapons lose their purpose. The sand no longer needs to be turned after each match, and somewhere, perhaps without ceremony, the last trained gladiator walks away from an arena that no longer knows how to use him, carrying on his body the scars of a world that is ending only in pieces. The arena never fully vanishes because Rome never leaves the imagination. Long after the last professional gladiator disappears into uncertainty, the ruined amphitheatres remain like enormous stone memories, open to rain, grass, tourists, scholars, pigeons, and silence. Their arches no longer hold the same crowds, but they still organise attention. A person standing inside the Colosseum today can look up at the broken tiers and feel, almost physically, the scale of the old arrangement. The ranked seats, the Emperor's Place, the underground corridors, the bright oval where bodies once stood exposed. The spectacle is gone, yet the architecture still knows how to make a human being look small. That is part of its power. The ruin does not show the games directly. It leaves enough emptiness for the mind to rebuild them. This rebuilding is never neutral. Every age creates its own gladiator. Medieval and early modern viewers saw the amphitheatres through the lenses of ruin, martyrdom, pagan cruelty, architectural wonder, or imperial warning. Later artists turned gladiators into figures of heroic suffering, masculine beauty, doomed courage, or moral drama. Modern film and television made them global icons, often larger, cleaner, and more individual than most ancient fighters could have been. The gladiator becomes a rebel, a celebrity, a victim, a warrior, a lover, a symbol of freedom, a symbol of brutality, sometimes all at once. What survives in the record suggests lives far more constrained and complex than these images. But myth has its own appetite. Rome staged gladiators for its crowd. Later cultures stage them again for theirs. The most famous modern gladiator is often imagined as a man fighting for liberty against tyranny, and that image owes much to the enduring memory of Spartacus. His revolt was real, dangerous, and deeply unsettling to Rome. But popular memory has made him carry meanings that reach far beyond the surviving evidence. He becomes the enslaved man who refuses the role assigned to him, the fighter who turns training against the masters. The body meant for spectacle that instead becomes a political threat. Scholars still debate details of his aims, leadership, and the composition of his rebel forces, because ancient sources are fragmentary and hostile. Yet the attraction of the story is obvious. It gives the gladiator what the arena usually denies him: a voice in history, even when that voice must be reconstructed from enemies' accounts. But most gladiators were not Spartacus. Most did not lead armies. Most did not break Rome's order. Their legacy survives in smaller and stranger ways: a scratched name on a wall, a lamp stamped with a helmeted figure, a mosaic showing the moment before a defeat, a gravestone recording victories, a skeleton bearing healed wounds, a skull buried beneath later streets. These traces resist the grand story. They remind us that the arena's truth lies not only in rebellion or death, but in repetition. Training, fighting, healing, waiting, being watched, being judged, returning. The ordinary rhythm of the gladiator's life may be harder to imagine than the famous final blow because it lacks the clean shape of legend. Yet that rhythm is where the system reveals itself most completely. Modern fascination with gladiators often begins with horror, but it rarely stays there. People are drawn to the contrast between beauty and cruelty, skill and coercion, fame and shame. The arena offers a disturbing mirror because it joins things modern societies still recognize: celebrity, violence as entertainment, public judgment, bodies turned into spectacle, moral outrage mixed with desire, and institutions that can make suffering appear orderly. The ancient amphitheatre feels distant enough to be safely condemned, but familiar enough to unsettle. No single explanation fully accounts for why the gladiator remains so compelling. But part of the answer may be that he stands at the crossing point between admiration and guilt. Viewers can respect courage while questioning the world that demanded it. Tourism adds another layer. Millions visit Roman amphitheatres not to cheer death, but to encounter the remains of a civilization that could build so magnificently around controlled violence. Cameras rise where voices once rose. Guides explain where the emperor sat, where animals emerged, where fighters waited. The ancient machinery becomes heritage. There is value in that, because ruins can teach, and public memory can preserve what forgetting would erase. Yet there is also danger in smoothing the stones too much, in turning the arena into a backdrop without bodies. The Colosseum is beautiful because it is grand, balanced, and wounded by time. It is terrible because of what that beauty once served. Archaeology helps keep the darkness grounded. It pulls attention back from myth to material evidence, from cinematic sand to bone, diet, injury, inscription, and burial. It shows that gladiators were not fantasy warriors and not simple victims without identity. They were people inside a system designed to use their bodies while sometimes preserving their names. The evidence remains incomplete, and it always will. Most voices are lost. Most fear left no inscription. Most pain did not fossilize into certainty. Still, enough survives to challenge the easy versions. Gladiators were trained professionals and coerced performers, degraded outsiders and admired figures, economic assets and mortal bodies, symbols of Roman order and reminders of Roman violence. The arena never fully vanished because its questions never fully vanished. What does a civilization permit itself to watch? How does power turn suffering into ceremony? Why can a crowd admire courage in a person it has helped endanger Rome? Answered those questions in stone, sand, law, money, and blood. Later ages answer them differently, but not always more comfortably. The gladiator remains because he exposes a polished brutality at the heart of empire, the ability to make violence meaningful, profitable, beautiful, and public. His world is gone, but the fascination remains, standing among the ruins like a figure still waiting for judgment. The old amphitheatre is quiet now. Evening settles where the awnings once moved in the heat, and the broken stones hold the last light without applause. Grass grows in cracks that once felt the pressure of thousands of feet. Birds pass through arches built for crowds that believed the world could be gathered, ranked, judged, and mastered. The sand has been replaced, covered, excavated, imagined again and again. But the silence is not empty. It is full of everything that no longer needs to shout. To remember the gladiators clearly is not to turn them into simple heroes, simple victims, or simple monsters. It is to let the contradiction remain. They lived in a world that could train courage inside captivity, preserve a body in order to risk it, grant fame without dignity, and ask a crowd to confuse judgment with pleasure. Some fought with skill, some died nameless, some became beloved, some were buried by friends, some left only marks in bone. Around them rose one of the most powerful civilizations the world has ever known, confident enough to call its violence order and organized enough to make that order beautiful. Time has softened the roar, but it has not erased the question beneath it. Civilizations are often remembered by their roads, laws, temples, armies, poems, and monuments. Yet they are also remembered by what they made ordinary, by what they allowed people to watch without turning away. Rome's amphitheatres remain because stone lasts longer than excuses. They stand beneath open sky, no longer demanding blood, but still asking what kind of world built them, filled them, loved them, and finally left them behind. And in the fading light, the last image is not of an emperor, not of a cheering crowd, not even of a sword. It is of a single figure at the centre of the sand, face hidden or exposed, breath heavy under armour, hearing the world rise around him. For one suspended moment, he is spectacle, prisoner, professional, symbol, and man. Then the sentries close over the arena, the voices fall away, and only the stone remains, holding its silence like a wound that history still cannot quite heal.